everyone here should already be looking after each other. We all rely on one another, and that's how we resist the state.
Oh, didums. I took that footage at the London anti-women's rights protest, which was staged by gender nutters in the wake of the Supreme Court decision arrived at last week in the case of For Women Scotland versus the Scottish ministers. Obviously, while I was amongst them, I had to disguise myself as an idiot so I wouldn't stand out. Anyway, quite a few people have been asking for a video on this topic, which I take as a compliment, thank you. To be honest, I haven't been in the best place emotionally over the past week while I've been trying to read everything that everyone is saying about the judgment. I have, of course, created a page full of relevant links on my website at peaktrans.org. Now, don't get me wrong, I was as joyful as the next person who genuinely cares about all human rights, and on the day of the ruling, I had a great time celebrating with loads of such people. Here are just a few of them. The party was pre-planned as either a celebration or a commiseration, but personally, I did not contemplate losing this. I have always maintained that we will win this war. We might lose a few battles along the way, especially with so many people in positions of power being such despicable, unprincipled cowards. But I always believed that sanity would ultimately prevail because gender ideology is based on a lie. It is indefensible nonsense that is untenable in the long term. We've also got the best people, the brainiest people, and the bravest people on our side, while they, the enemy, repeatedly shoot themselves in the foot with idiotic public pronouncements, not to mention the thuggish behaviour by their horrible grassroots activists. We haven't won the war yet, but with some important legal victories under our belt and with successive public surveys, most recently a YouGov poll in February showing that the British public is increasingly waking up to gender ideology and they don't like it. Even younger people, even women, amongst whom are those who are most inclined to think it's just about being kind and let live, etc. Even those people are turning against it, which I take as confirmation for what I have always believed, that women who believe men can be women don't know much about transgenderism. Earlier this year, I felt as if we had just about landed on the beach at Normandy. With the Supreme Court ruling, it now feels like we've crossed the Rhine River. Berlin is still some distance away, but make no mistake, it will be ours. But the responses by those who are disappointed at this victory of good over evil have only served to remind me why gender lunacy caused me to lose my faith in humanity in the first place. I find the ignorance of people who haven't even bothered to get informed on what the ruling was actually about before spouting arrant nonsense about it. I find them every bit as offensive as those who've had their eyes shut and their ears plugged up for so many years and are oblivious to the harm that has been caused. Now, for the benefit of anyone who is interested but who hasn't been following this closely, and I especially don't expect people outside the UK to have done so, I'm going to try to explain as concisely as I can how we ended up with this appeal to the Supreme Court. I'll kick off with a mention of our friend Jamie Dodger, who has done a brilliantly insightful short video in which she concludes,
"This is not something that is going to protect any woman in any way and is literally just transphobia."
which, as we know, is her comment on everything under the sun. But the reason I'm showing this is because of what I saw in the comments, the first one of which asked, why did they only choose to define women? This received 66 responses, and I reckon about 50 of them all gave the same one-word response: misogyny, misogyny, misogyny. On and on it goes. That's how much the stupid burns, and is an example of why I feel pissed off. So let's get to it. In 2018, a law was made by the Scottish Parliament with the object of increasing the proportion of women on public boards in Scotland. Its definition of woman included trans-identifying men, thereby undermining the very purpose it was created to achieve. So it started with a challenge to a piece of legislation that was specifically about women. In 2022, the grassroots campaigning group for Women Scotland mounted a legal challenge in the Scottish courts that the definition of woman being used in that law they'd made was unlawful, and they won. But what the Scottish Government then did was issue new statutory guidance stating that the definition of woman used in the Scottish law is the same as that in the Equality Act of 2010, which covers the whole of the UK, not just Scotland. That law had brought together and updated all the anti-discrimination law that already existed, and it specifies 9 characteristics on which it is illegal to discriminate against or harass or victimize people. Here's the list. Now, I think I've said before that there is or appears to be a conflict between sex and gender reassignment. It would seem to be an important sex-based right, for example, that we have some single-sex spaces, especially where we're getting undressed. And there is, in fact, provision in the Equality Act for maintaining single-sex services as, quote, a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. The Equality Act defines woman as a female of any age, and of course a man is defined as a male of any age, which sounds okay, doesn't it? But what about gender reassignment? A law that was passed 6 years earlier in 2004 called the Gender Recognition Act, the GRA, allows people who have gone through a specified process, though not necessarily involving any medical interventions, to change what it calls their gender and be awarded a gender recognition certificate. So it's not mere gender identity that is protected under the Equality Act, it is gender reassignment. We don't have gender self-ID in this country. It's not legislated for as it is in some other countries. That's another thing that some people are confused about. The GRA states where a gender recognition certificate is issued to a person, the person's gender becomes for all purposes the acquired gender, so that if the acquired gender is the male gender, the person's sex becomes that of a man, and if it is the female gender, the person's sex becomes that of a woman. It uses the word gender throughout as a synonym for sex, and it created what is referred to as a legal fiction and what the Supreme Court judgment calls certificated sex as distinct from biological sex. So, in spite of the Equality Act allowing for single-sex spaces where necessary, the GRA, which is an atrocious law that should never have been made and should be repealed, in my opinion, throws a spanner into the works. So the Scottish Government's position on the meaning of the word woman was that it's the same as in the Equality Act 2010, a female of any age, but it maintained that a man with a gender recognition certificate is female. And that is the issue that was in front of the Supreme Court after the Heroic for Women Scotland group had challenged the statutory guidance in the Scottish courts and lost. They appealed to the Supreme Court, which had to finally rule on the meaning of the words man, woman, and sex in the Equality Act. As the judgment put it, our task is to see if those words can bear a coherent and predictable meaning within the Equality Act 2010, consistently with the Gender Recognition Act 2004. And we won. On 16 April 2025, the announcement came that
the unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
A pivotal moment in a landmark case.
So, to be absolutely clear, the law is not changed by this ruling. It has simply clarified the original intent. For 15 years, the law has been misinterpreted and disregarded by pretty much all the major institutions and many service providers who have treated gender identity rather than gender reassignment as if it were the protected characteristic. I mention that because it's true and relevant, not because that was an issue before the Supreme Court. And B, have wrongly assumed that it is lawful to treat trans-identifying men as women and trans-identifying women as men for all purposes. And this misunderstanding of the law has had a massive impact on the culture, to the detriment mostly of women and girls. Most trans-identifying people in this country do not even hold a gender recognition certificate, but we've seen a number of dreadful incidents caused by just letting men who say they're women access women's spaces. Stonewall UK, who made a fortune running training courses misinforming people about the law, have a lot to answer for, but even people who hadn't been directly indoctrinated by them seem to think that, oh well, some law or other says something like trans women are women, so that's how we'll treat them. And until Maya Forstata's ruling, some employers got away with sacking people for expressing disagreement with that viewpoint. And some are still getting away with it, though it is clearly unlawful now. Cultural change takes time. Fighting back, especially against a vicious, hateful cult of bullies promoting a toxic ideology, takes courage and money. And we do not get funded by right-wing American Christians or fascists or any such pathetic nonsense that our enemies spew out. We fund ourselves. The only very wealthy supporter that I know of is J.K. Rowling. Bless her. Now, turning our attention to reactions from the enemy, the very first one I saw was repeated by loads of posters on social media, and it goes like this.
It's just not fair, damn it!
More didums. But what's not fair? I've only seen one claim that I think is worth addressing, which was that trans people were excluded from the Supreme Court Justice's considerations. I've seen it from several high-profile people, including Green MSP, Member of Scottish Parliament, Maggie Chapman, who is Deputy Convener of the Scottish Parliament's Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee. I understand that she made a diabolical speech at one of the protests last week, packed with misinformation, accusing the Supreme Court of bigotry, prejudice and hatred after it said woman in the Equality Act refers to biology. Several people have complained about her including the faculty of advocates, but there have been loads of idiotic and despicable comments from other MPs and trade union leaders. I'm only highlighting Chapman because I so enjoyed Julie Bindle's comment that if she had any fewer brain cells, we'd have to water her like a pot plant twice a day. I think that goes for many of them, including Jolyon Maugham, otherwise known as Jomo the Fox Killer. That was my personal tribute to him. Jomo is a lawyer. He is the founder of a campaigning organisation called the Good Law Project, which is notorious for backing the wrong horses. And like many a person whose brain has been addled by the gender cult that one or more of their own children has joined, allegedly, Jomo has lost touch with reality and is frequently and deservedly mocked on social media. He framed the ruling as being entirely about the rights of trans people, which makes him sound quite deranged, frankly. I'll resist the temptation to make fun of him and confine myself to his complaint. I think he was the first person to make it that the Supreme Court justices excluded trans people from their deliberations. And this is the kind of crackpot response Jomo's allegation drew. This was rigged the moment trans people were excluded. What exactly does Jomo mean? Now, in his article, which you can find at goodlawproject.org, he points out that lots of organisations applied to be heard by the Supreme Court, and it agreed to hear from them. Sex Matters, which is the charity started by Maya Fulstata and Helen Joyce and others, did a submission. There was a combined submission from Scottish Lesbians, which is a group of about 60 members, the Lesbian Project, founded by Julie Bindle and Kathleen Stock, and the LGB Alliance. There was also one in support of the Scottish Government's position from the totally captured charity Amnesty UK, and one from the EHRC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, whose role, amongst other things, is to ensure the Equality Act is correctly enforced, and who are now tasked with bringing out new statutory guidance. All these groups are what are called interveners. I looked it up and I learnt that in law, an intervener is a third party who is not originally involved in a legal case but is permitted to join the proceedings. They may be granted permission by the court to intervene if they have a specific interest in the outcome of the case or if their involvement is deemed to be in the interests of justice. In the same article, Jomo tells us that no trans organisations applied to intervene. I wonder why. But two trans-identifying individuals, Stephen Whittle and Victoria MacLeod, who were the architects of the Gender Recognition Act in 2004, did apply to make a joint submission, and Jomo's organisation funded them to the tune of, quote, many tens of thousands of pounds. We don't know why their submission was rejected. It is standard practice not to give reasons, but according to Grok, the likely basis for the rejection was that the court determined their intervention would not provide significant assistance beyond the arguments already presented by the main parties. Posts on X suggest the court applied standard legal tests for granting permission to intervene, requiring that interventions raise novel, important, and relevant points of law. It appears the justices concluded that Whittle and MacLeod's submissions did not meet this threshold, possibly because their arguments overlapped with those already before the court and were deemed insufficiently distinct. That seems plausible enough, given that the justices had accepted a submission from Amnesty UK in support of the respondents, which was written by a barrister, a silk, and is jam-packed with legal arguments and references to case law. I skimmed through it, and it is deadly. Jomo's beef with it is that Amnesty UK isn't trans, as if being trans is going to bring something special that only a trans identifying person can know. He seems to be forgetting that the task before the Supreme Court justices was to establish the meanings of certain words according to the law for the purpose of clarity. They were not in the position of a government making a new law or changing an existing law and looking to consult widely with those affected, like the Scottish government didn't do when it passed its gender recognition bill in 2022, having failed to consult with women's groups. That law, or proposed law, was mercifully blocked by the UK government, and the Scottish government have said they have no plans to reintroduce it. Hooray. So, no, Jomo is flogging a dead horse with that one, or a dead fox, perhaps. I don't need to waste too much breath on the other idiots who obviously don't have a clue what they're talking about. Here's one of the most ridiculous comments I've seen online. How is this disaster not exactly like the series of laws which cut away slowly at the rights of Jews and Roma people and mentally ill people and developmentally delayed people and, oh yes, LGBT plus people? Please tell us how this first stripping of rights is not exactly like the first stripping of rights in 1930s Germany. Words fail me. What exactly does this person think the ruling says? Why haven't they read at least the summary of the judgment? And what about those who turned out in some major cities around the country last weekend to express their anger in their usual charming fashion and vandalise statues because they believe for some unfathomable reason that the ruling deprives trans-identifying people of some unspecified rights? It doesn't. It makes clear that they have exactly the same rights as everyone else. But these are the people who are okay with the erasure of homosexuals as same-sex attracted men and women, which in practice has meant the disappearance of lesbian spaces, dating apps, etc., thanks to their invasion by straight male fetishists who have the temerity to define themselves as lesbians and expect to be welcomed into the beds of women who are only attracted to women. Real ones. And although most trans-identifying women are lesbians, we are seeing an increasing number of straight women jumping onto the trans bandwagon and expecting the same courtesy from gay men. Denying people's natural sexual orientation is not progress. And they think that men like these should be entitled to access the public toilets, changing rooms, domestic violence refuges and prisons designated for females without a care for how that makes the female occupants of such spaces feel, or for the fact that some have been physically violated. That's not progress either. They don't care about the sportswomen who've been cheated, about whom I've spoken ad nauseam. All of these injustices will be impacted by the ruling, and all they can do now is flail about and cry and abuse us and boast about how they're going to carry on behaving like the entitled bullies they've always been. It will take a while for it to sink in that although they may have been getting away with behaving unlawfully in the past, and in fairness, they wouldn't necessarily have known it was unlawful. They probably thought the law was on their side. Things are about to change. We're already seeing some encouraging signs. We look forward to the EHRC's newly revised statutory guidance and the necessary changes to rules and policies that have been hurting mainly women and girls. I also understand from people better qualified to comment than I am that this ruling could potentially influence legal decisions made in other countries that have similar legal frameworks. But in this country, starting from right now, we need to be vigilant in the workplace, in the universities, in the schools, in the hospitals, and everywhere else to make sure that policies that prioritised, that privileged the feelings of trans-identifying people over others are consigned to the dustbin of history where they belong. That's all for now. Hi everyone!
Hi.
And here we are enjoying the trans rights, aka men's rights activist protest at Parliament Square. There are loads of them here having their little tantrums with their nasty placards. We talked about why they could possibly be here, what are they trying to achieve here, why are they here. Basically,
We don't know.
no, we don't know. We don't know what they're going to achieve. It's just to have a tantrum and to make themselves feel better because we're winning.
Yeah, they've had it all their own way for so long and they just can't bear it. But we are winning.
Oh, I just wanted to add that some TERFs got here before us and they've gone and put stickers up all over the place, which is absolutely shocking, isn't it? Yeah. We would never do anything like that.